All right. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learning Tech Talks, where we are exploring the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff to answer the questions you need answered to make the right decisions when building your digital learning ecosystem. I'm excited. Today, I'm joined by Charles Smith. He's the founder of Amplifire, and we're going to be digging into some of the commonly held myths about the way learning really happens while highlighting some of the ways they've designed their product to address them. So for those of you joining us live, be sure to give us a thumbs up, share the post, tag in someone who would benefit from the conversation, and in the comments, let us know where you're joining from. So I am joining from the ever beautiful Waukesha, Wisconsin. And Charles, I forgot to ask you, where are you joining from?
I am in, good morning, Christopher. I am in Encinitas, California. It's on the Southern California.
Okay.
It's a little north of San Diego, and it's been raining here since Sunday, nonstop.
Okay.
Very odd for Southern California.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not like a normal weather pattern for you, I have to imagine.
No, we've been having these what are called atmospheric rivers for the last all of March and so far all of April, and they come off the equator and they kind of slant up from the rain band that goes around the planet at the equator, and they come into Mexico or California and they bring a lot of rain. It's thought that a really good, this is a strange little aside, but it's super interesting if you like the weather at all, as I do. An atmospheric river can hold about 5 Amazons worth of water.
Wow.
An extraordinary amount of water. And it can be a dangerous thing, of course.
Okay. That's something. So, all right. The fact kind of threw me for a loop. So
yeah, good. We're off to a good start.
I know we're off to a good start. You're throwing a thing in my rhythm. All right. So the other question, and I don't know if you've had a chance to think. I know I pulled an audible on you, and you didn't have an answer yet. So if I need to go first, I can. But for those of you watching, you can also comment in on this. So on the topic that's relevant to what we're talking about today, what is something you thought you knew, you swore you knew it, only to find out later you were wrong? Did you
Yeah.
yet?
I did.
Okay,
I did.
great.
Yeah. You hate, of course, admitting that there was ever anything that you really knew, with some certainty and were wrong. But I built a pool on my property a couple of years ago, and I know a little meteorology, as you just discovered, and I know quite a bit of geology. It's one of my passions is to study geology. And I thought I knew the geology of my property pretty well, and that I could just dig that pool with no problem. It's just sediment here. It should be easy to dig out. And about 3 feet down, I hit something that is like a little harder than cement. And the cost of the pool went insane from there. I mean, it was just jackhammering for 3 weeks to try and get through this cement. So my confidence was, it was shaken.
Okay. So you're like, I can do this. I can build a pool. I'll just dig it. And then surprise, you found something that was under that you were not expecting.
Yeah.
Okay. So I shared mine backstage before we went live, but I'll share it again because I think it might surprise a lot of people. So the song "We Are the Champions" by Queen, right? Every time I would think of it or sing it, in the shower or wherever, I always swore at the end of it, they say "of the world," right? We are the champions of the world. And then I don't remember where, but I saw that was a commonly held myth, that people think that's how it ends. And I had to listen to the song about 12 times before I went, it ends with "We are the champions," and that's it. And I went, it seems like a silly thing to just blow your mind, but it was definitely one that threw me for a loop. Similar to your meteorology comment in the Amazon, quantities of rain, same type of thing.
Well, the atmospheric river thing's fascinating, and of course, it's not the topic for today. But there was one that came into California in the 1860s that literally, you know what the Central Valley is? It goes from like Sacramento, kind of down to just north of Los Angeles. That was a lake that was 300 miles long, 50 miles wide, and 20 feet deep, because the two rivers that drain the Central Valley could not drain it fast enough with 5 Amazons hitting the Sierra Nevada mountains. So that hasn't happened since, and we really do not want that to happen again. There's a lot of people that are there now that weren't there then. So it would be the headlines definitely for quite a while.
It would. All right. So let's talk into, right. So we've had our fun intros now. Let's get
Yeah.
into some of the cognitive science behind this and the psychology. But before we do that, so you were the founder of Amplifier. Talk a little bit, just so people who may not be familiar with Amplifier or who have heard of it but maybe don't know a lot. Tell me a little bit about the journey there, or what Amplifier is.
Yeah. And do you mind if we just start at even a higher level,
Yeah, go
Christopher?
for it.
Kind of the ultimate level to start, and I'd love to talk about Amplifier and the details behind the platform. But at the highest level, philosophically, about kind of the learning, training, teaching profession that we're all in, and I'm sure your viewers are in there somewhere, as you and I are. Um, it is, I guess you start at this high level to think about what its effect is on the world. What good is training and teaching and learning? And it in a way, it's at the core of everything that we hold near and dear. In this society, it's a very wealthy, as surely the United States and Europe,
Yeah.
what you call Western civilization, very wealthy. If you brought one of your ancestors from the Middle Ages up to the present, he or she would be utterly astonished by the technology that's around us. It would look like complete magic to that person. We would be like gods. And the thing that has made that all possible, that huge transition, and we don't really notice this. We're born into a world that has got some tech around. Even when I was born, yeah, I'm in my 60s now, but TVs existed and radios existed. The internet didn't exist yet, but some very serious technological stuff did. That is magic. And if you're born into it, you might not notice how incredible the time that we live in actually is. Uh, and what's at the core of that? I gave you one slide that
Yeah.
shows kind of the classic economic thing that's called the circular flow model of the economy. It's just a fun one to look at for a second, because this is the classic macroeconomic model. And there's just two actors in this thing. There's individuals, people like everybody, like you and me, and everybody listening, and businesses, organizations that have some product or service. And at the top, those organizations send goods and services to people. People buy those goods and services with money. That's the expenditures line. Businesses pay wages to people, and people offer up their labor to businesses for those wages. That is the classic circular flow. But and it's responsible for this amazing economy that we have. At the core of it, though, is know-how. I had this wonderful professor when I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder in the 70s, a guy named Kenneth Boulding. And Kenneth Boulding was a man ahead of his time to a great extent. And he kind of proved out this model as a trained economist, that knowledge is really at the center. And
Okay.
if you and your viewers kind of look around the room you're in right now, every object that's in there, it could be your desk, it could be the computer, the curtains, the furniture, even the drywall on your walls. It all has what's called embodied knowledge in it. There's just a massive amount of know-how that sits into how to make a sheet, a 4x8 sheet of
Yeah.
drywall. I mean, it's a sophisticated thing. If you went to the drywall factory, you'd be like, oh my God, this is like an unbelievable process. And there's so much to know. It's literally, knowledge is at the core of everything that we hold near and dear. And even societies that don't have a sophisticated economy like this, I go to South America. I try to go like once a year, and we do conservation stuff back to the Amazon. In the Amazon rainforests, we do a lot of conservation, and in the Andes. And the indigenous tribes down there, we're always lucky if we can hang out for a day or two with some indigenous group that
Yep.
does not have this kind of economy. They've got a very different, much more ancient economy. But again, it's all driven by knowledge. They'll know every single plant in the forest, what's good to eat, what
Won't
will
kill
kill
you.
you if you eat it,
Yeah.
what are the hallucinogens we can have a party with, and see and meet the gods on some kind of. They know all that stuff, and again, it's knowledge that allows them to exist in a place. You and I would last a day or two down there.
Right.
It's like
I'd eat the wrong
amazing.
goods. That'd be it.
You definitely eat the wrong stuff. So so at the high level, I need to assure myself that I'm in an industry that matters. And if you're in the knowledge industry in some way, you are in the industry that kind of matters the most, in a sense. I mean, they're all important out there. It's knowledge that allows us to keep the lights on. So the guys running the power plant, super important, but it is knowledge that allows them to do all of that stuff. And so I just kind of like starting up at that level. It's because knowledge and learning are important that I was so intrigued. Really with the first kind of ideas I saw that would end up being the Amplifier platform.
Okay.
I'd met a guy at UCLA. He was a professor of education, and he'd invented this kind of wonderful what we ended up calling confidence assessment.
Okay.
And his assessment, it asked you, it's Socratic in a sense. I mean, Socrates had it right.
Master
Ask lots of questions, master of questions, some mind-bogglingly, tricky questions on occasion. He really loved to challenge his students, and we'll talk about difficulty in learning maybe a little later on. It's something you want to have in a learning experience. It should feel a little difficult. You should feel the challenge in it. But Jim Bruno, Professor Bruno, had invented this confidence-based thing. You have to kind of you're assessed in what you know, of course, but then you also are asked to kind of signify how certain you are in that information, and that's a super interesting thing. It's very pragmatic as well, because think of confidence and certainty as the feeling in your brain. It's sometimes called the feeling of knowing, that is going to cause you to act in the world. If you're confident in something, you're going to act. You're going to head out and do it. Very likely to do it. If you feel a little hesitation, some uncertainty, much less likely. And if you just have nothing's there, I am just ignorant on this thing, it's a gigantic knowledge gap, you're probably going to ask. You're definitely not going to act with confidence.
Okay.
And so you can see that confidence has this really practical aspect of the way that we move through the world. And when I saw Bruno's invention, which was just brand new. He put that together probably in the late 90s. He was working on that. I thought I'd never seen anything like it before, and it should be a digital platform of some sort. This assessment should be digital, and it turns out that confidence it's asking you if you're certain. When you kind of start off with this great question, like, tell me something that you were sure you knew it, and you turned out to be wrong. You were incorrect. You were confident and incorrect.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of that in the world, and when you're confronted,
effect.
well, then there's the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is a fantastic thing. And in that case, it's this combination of, you really don't know maybe but just a little teeny bit of a domain, but you have massive confidence behind what you think you know.
What you think you know.
You just don't know enough to know how little you really know.
You actually know.
Yeah. And what happens is you go up the spectrum. I've been very, very fortunate to have dinner with some Nobel laureates, and I know some pretty amazing scientists. Those folks are real, true experts in their domain, but they're extremely humble about information and knowledge that might be just right next to their domain. They will be, I'm not an expert there. You have to talk to my friend so and so. He really knows that area really well. Learning, when you get to some level, you realize, boy, there is so much to learn, and I have this narrow slice of expertise. It's the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You become humble about knowledge, and it's Dunning-Kruger's a fascinating phenomenon. It'd be fun to get one of those psychologists on your show at some point.
I know, right? It would. I mean, I've had a couple conversations where we dug into it a little bit about that, where right, the further up the curve you go, actually, you learn how much you don't know, which actually makes you underassess your confidence.
You know how Dunning first came up upon the phenomenon that's now named after he and his associate Kruger, Dunning-Kruger. He was reading a story in the paper one morning about a bank robber who'd had a rather unsuccessful attempt at robbing a bank. This bank robber had become convinced somehow that if he made up a certain kind of lemon juice formulation and covered his body in this lemon juice concoction, he would be invisible to the cameras in the bank. And Dunning is
Very
reading the
confident.
stories going, man, he was confident enough to go in and rob a bank with his stuff on him. That's how strongly he believed this. And he started experimenting with the notion of a high amount of kind of ignorance is not necessarily stupid. That's a different thing. Just
Right.
ignorant of the reality of things, and very confident at the same time. And he's become, of course, very famous for that. And he's done us all a service because there's more of that in the world than we care to imagine.
Okay.
One of the things Amplifier does is ferret that out. The platform.
Okay.
It starts with asking you, and in any domain, our business is now we've got a extremely robust healthcare practice. There's some, multi-billion-dollar systems that train their doctors and their nurses and their technicians in our platform. We have these call center business. It's in what we call the performance side of our business. Call centers, airlines. Call centers are enormous operations. I mean, there's some of these call center operations will have 20, 30,000 employees answering the phones. They're having a little more of a difficult time right now. They're not all allowed to cluster together because we're in this odd circumstance at the moment. But in all of those domains, the thing that those managers are looking for is to ferret out, to discover the confidently held misinformation that might exist in the minds of their employees. And there's more of that surely related to Dunning-Kruger, but confidently held misinformation does show up for kind of a variety of reasons. There's just kind of classic forgetting. There's a thing called interference that can take place when you go to retrieve a memory. Sometimes the memory that comes back out of storage isn't as pristine as when it first was formed. And it's coming with other baggage, if you will. And so it just does. Retrieval is just not a perfect thing. The information in your head is a pattern of neurons. And when you go to find your way to that pattern that represents information, it doesn't necessarily come back, especially over time, with the same fidelity that it was originally. So there's a couple of reasons that this can end up being the case, that people can have confidently held misinformation. Sometimes the information just changes. A doctor who learned something, 15, 20 years ago, that was strong when he learned it in medical school. But processes and practices have changed. There's new techniques, and you can sometimes revert back to what was so at one time and have a lot of confidence in it. You still have a retrieval pathway back to that old information, and hence confident but wrong can show up once again. I have
this has to be rearing its ugly head then, especially right now when you look at the amount of time, and this is a huge problem in our industry right now, is the fact that skills are changing at a pace that is unprecedented, right? Because of how things are changing. And so that misinformation based on, well, this is how it was, which may have been extremely accurate even 2-3 years ago, is not extremely accurate anymore, and that's speeding up. So I can see where that misinformation comes from, probably at a pace that is accelerating more than anything.
That's a great point. Yeah, because the pace of change is so rapid now in this world. And knowledge has never been more important. If you want to, given the fact that the robots are coming, and AI is coming,
here.
and they're here. There's going to be some reskilling at large scale that's necessary, and folks who do have misinformation confidently wielded in the world are going to be at some disadvantage. So our platform, we love it for that reason. Kind of our mission in life, to a very great extent, is to find and fix confidently held misinformation.
Okay, so it's really like hunted out through this confidence assessment, is to say, where is this in an organization, in our employees?
Because it's so dangerous. Confidence is, as we talked about earlier, it's this way that you kind of gauge whether or not you should act in the world. The bank robber that got Dunning and Kruger onto that thread, he acted out of his confidence. Confidence is the thing. It's a mental thing sometimes called the feeling of knowing. It's sometimes called metacognition. It's thinking about your thinking. So confidence is just this critical thing. Knowing the wrong thing is one thing, but being confident in it and then acting on it, that is something else. And boy, no organization, no hospital wants to have that floating around. And if you pull up that one graphic, I'll show you what we've discovered in the world. It's kind of astonishing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the one. This is Amplifier at pretty large scale. I mean, in all of these cases, we're talking about statistically really significant numbers. It's going to be, it's going to be
With a very high risk of making a mistake, right?
Yeah.
There's some serious consequences associated with making a mistake on these.
Yeah. So at the assessment phase in Amplifier, this is where people are starting out. We're going to find this and fix it in Amplifier. That's Amplifier's main kind of mission. The reason that technology exists is to discover that red.
Okay.
Excuse me, that confidently held misinformation and the uncertainty. You can see that all people are also sometimes just not sure. And the green you could call it mastery, or could call it confident and correct. That's where you're trying to get everybody to, and that's what our platform is designed to do. But
so
this will be
the first step is being able to really dig in, right? Through this assessment piece, it's about digging into where the gaps actually exist. It's almost a bit of a needs analysis on the front end of things. Is that fair?
It's fair. And the platform we're adaptive. You've heard everybody's an adaptive platform, right? We adapt to this situation.
Okay.
This is kind of our primary thing we want to discover and make all of this green.
Okay.
It's one thing to be just ignorant and just to not know. That's kind of an innocuous state of mind. You're not going to do too much damage if you just don't know something. You're not going to act. There's no confidence behind you with which to act to go rob the bank with lemon juice on you. Yeah, but if you're if you're a doctor and you've got some confidently held misinformation, you are at some great risk of causing some harm. And in the healthcare profession, Christopher, you may or may not know this kind of a rather astonishing statistic, but a mistake in a hospital is the third leading cause of death in the United States right now. Maybe you've heard that before. I think in order, it's cancer, heart disease, which just switched last year, oddly.
Okay.
Used to be heart disease, now cancer, heart disease, and then mistake in a hospital.
There's serious consequences.
Serious consequences. So you see that misinformation running at kind of nearly 30% when someone's first in Amplifier, and you go, boy, it's a dangerous place to be in a hospital. You just do not want that to happen to you. And it's this kind of universal thing. You can see oil rig workers and doctors and pilots and hospital techs and call center agents. Everybody has some proportion
of this misinformation.
Yep. So that's our thing. And these are the generalizations. There's one more slide we can just look at real quick, and then maybe we'll go back to you and I. These are the details of doctors and pilots. These are individuals, and what I want to kind of get across here is just the incredible human variation that shows up when someone is first coming to Amplifier. You can see the doctor at the top in that upper left quadrant. He's got his information is about 50% or so confidently held but incorrect. And there's another doctor in the same platform, probably on the same day, who's just a master of that domain. And this will be some discrete topic in medicine. It will be, it'll be how to identify and treat sepsis, for example.
Well, like the one is there, pediatric sepsis. So sepsis in children.
Yeah, this one's pediatric sepsis, is exactly right. And this will be, it'll be a series of children's hospitals, and you'll just go, well, how can that kind of variation exist? But the platform is showing the educators and the managers at this hospital just how wide the problem kind of can be. We have true experts in pediatric sepsis, and then we have some docs who really need some help. The platform is designed to adapt to help with that misinformation.
Help bring Dr. 814 closer to where Dr. 269 is.
Yeah. In fact, in alignment. And misinformation, from the cognitive psychology standpoint, it because it's confidently held, um, it is a little difficult to eradicate. If you think in terms of neurons, which our companies kind of were immersed in both neuroscience and cognitive psychology. From the neuroscience standpoint, misinformation is a strong pattern of neurons. Somehow your brain is able to kind of send up, it's not totally understood, the neuroscience of this. There's some clues as to how it works, but you get this feeling, a strong signal that says, I got this,
Okay.
right? That's the sense of confidence and certainty that you have, sometimes called the feeling of knowing. And it's the thing you act on. That pattern of neurons is difficult to eradicate. So in all of the refreshers that the platform will then offer up, that doctor has that experience. He discovers his misinformation. He might experience, when he is confronted with his misinformation, here's and the platform tells you pretty quickly you're misinformed. Feedback and learning comes a little bit later, but he'll experience a thing often called hypercorrection,
Okay.
where you're just, you had the experience with the song. It did not end in those words.
When we are the champions, mind blown.
You kind of don't forget that, right?
Right.
And that's the beauty of this thing called hypercorrection. They're like, what? It's this
The shock.
elevated kind of sense of shock. And the learning is pretty profound when you're in that state. It's just this great psychological state to be in. You have to kind of be alert and attentive and pumped up a little bit, not too much, to really be in a great state for learning. So the Amplifier platform is trying all the time to keep people in this state of high awareness. Back to the psychology again. You cannot have people falling asleep and learning. It just will not happen. There's this very sweet spot where they're kind of activated. In technical terms, activation's high. There's certain neurotransmitters that are kind of up a little bit. If you can get yourself into that alert, you feel no threats necessarily. The environment is benign, but you're alert. That is the ultimate state to be in for learning. So
you want to push it. You want to push it to a level where you're alert, but not almost like on the defense. Right?
Yeah.
Is that where it goes too far, where you're almost in a fear state?
It's a great question. The fear state is not good for learning. It's just not. There is, I must say that there's a kind of emotional experience. Emotion ties in hugely to learning. It turns out that when things are emotional, we tend to learn them. There's a neuroscientist named Joseph Ledoux, a beautiful book called Synaptic Self. Really interesting book in the sense that when you read a book like that, you're literally discovering, it's self-discovery.
Okay.
You have a brain. Here's how it works. Here's many of the things that go right and can go wrong. And Ledoux says this amazing thing in Synaptic Self. He says emotion is the way that a nervous system assigns value to the incoming sensory information. And that's like an amazingly powerful thing to say. Assigns value, meaning kind of what are you going to pay attention to? What do you care about? Value. And so when there's emotion, a little emotion attached to things, we do tend to pay attention, and we tend to remember as well. So you can argue that something where there's too much emotion is how this thing called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, shows up, because you have an experience, the emotions are just overwhelming. It forms a memory, in a sense, this is a learning moment, and the memory is so strong you kind of can't turn it off very well anymore. It is always with you. You'd love to forget this. The battlefield is full of post-traumatic stress, because these poor guys and some gals experience these horrible things, and they cannot get the memory of that thing out of their head. So this is emotion. This is too much emotion. This is a nervous system assigning way too much value to this hyper emotional thing. So in a learning platform, you clearly don't want that.
No.
But you do want to move in the direction of just alertness.
Okay.
And so our platform does these things, like, shows you your confidently held misinformation, which keeps you in this state of alertness, which is just the sweet spot for learning.
Okay. So one of the questions that came in from Angela on this is, so in terms of this, right? So it's diagnosing where this confidently held misinformation is. What is guiding it to make sure that, it's assessing the right things? Like, how is that actually being incorporated into it so that it's making sure it's making an accurate assessment?
Right. So in say our healthcare practice, we build all the content
Okay.
by topic. So that pediatric sepsis, those individuals we looked at earlier, that'd be a pediatric sepsis
Okay.
course that we would have built. The pilots, the aerodynamics training that you see up there, there's like 2,500 pilots in that, and you go, whoa. Look at the human variation there between the pilot at the top with massive misinformation and the pilot down below who's a master of aerodynamics.
I do not want to be on pilot 691's plane. Let's just
Yeah,
say that.
right. It's strange, isn't it? I mean, this is the same course. This would be material that was supplied by the FAA.
Okay.
And then I think this company took those materials and converted them into our platform. So
Okay.
the content is coming from, great sources. The pediatric sepsis course would have been built with the experts in the country on pediatric sepsis.
Okay.
There's a thing called in the lower right, there's 3,700 nurses in a course called CLABSI. That's again built by CLABSI. I should just say, no one knows what CLABSI is. It's a kind of infection. It's a central line associated bloodstream infection,
Okay.
and it happens if you've got a port in, a big. Sometimes you'll have a port in the hospital, so they can infuse in fairly large amounts of some kind of medication, as opposed to the little intravenous drip process in a vein here. This will be a bigger port. That's the central line, and it's in like a big vein that's going to your heart, so you can move this thing all through your body rapidly. But central lines can get infected, and shockingly so. It's thought that somewhere around 30,000 Americans will die every year from a CLABSI infection.
Okay.
I mean, that's as many as will not, will succumb to a car accident. So they're really big numbers that you see in hospitals. So solving that problem with this course, and again, you just see an amazing amount of misinformation in one nurse and an expertise, what you want in another nurse. And so you go,
that's part of the content building, right? In
that's
short,
the content
it's part
side
of
of
the
it.
content building where you're saying, okay, we need to make sure we have the right information in here so that we are kind of going out and assessing where people are today.
Yeah. In some cases, the customer will build it in our authoring platform. I mean, there's a very robust authoring platform. It's WYSIWYG. It's got all the tools that you would see in something like Word, for example. So you can author all that content there. You can kind of assign who's going to be taking the course, who's going to be managing the people in the course. All that stuff is done in authoring, and oftentimes our customers will author the course, and sometimes will be responsible for finding experts to build, say, a healthcare course.
Okay. Sorry, my 9-year-old is trying to ask me a question, so Okay, so that's extremely helpful in terms of just kind of understanding how that comes to play. So let's keep digging into some of these things, because this is fascinating, right? When you start digging into the cognitive psychology and neuroscience behind this, what are some other? So we talked about this confidently misheld information. What other types of things lead to issues when it breaks down in learning?
Right. So the way that the platform works, it's kind of in two parts in a sense.
Okay.
We start with the assessment component where we're measuring what you know and your confidence behind it. That tells us an awful lot. The system then starts adapting very quickly to your uncertainty and your confidently held misinformation, and it's going to start to focus just on that area. If you come in, kind of a master of a domain, you're going to get out of the system very, very quickly. But if you show us confidently held misinformation, especially that, we're going to keep you in that topic for quite a while, until by the end of the Amplifire session, which usually runs 25 minutes, 30 minutes, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, depending on how expert you are. we're going to then throw you into learning. So it'll be the second phase is feedback and learning. We another great cognitive trick we do, we hold back the feedback. So when you kind of signify your confidence and correctness in the assessment phase, we'll tell you that you were dead wrong or you got that right, but we won't tell you much more than that in the first instance. We want to kind of, again, to keep your alertness level up, to keep your curiosity level up. We're going to hold that out for 5 or 10 minutes until we show you.
Okay, so that's counterintuitive, right?
It
Because
is
historically,
counterintuitive.
it's like, hey, I tell you something that you realize is wrong, or you thought you knew, now you realize you don't. The initial response intuitively would be, oh, well, now let me just tell you
Yep.
exactly what the right information is.
Yep. It's fun. And again, it just comes from the science. We have this kind of wonderful science board. The experiments that were done by researchers like our guys and others in the country shows that if you give feedback, it's most effective if you delay feedback a little bit. You're kind of creating a space in which the question kind of is still in your brain and to some extent, and it's there, and your alertness level is up. Some space is going by between the time you answered the question and the time you're getting feedback. Not a huge amount of space. It's going to be 5-10 minutes, but alertness level is high. And when you get that feedback in this spaced kind of a micro spacing, if you will, it's not like days of spacing, but a few minutes, it just, the empirical evidence is it works better to create a more robust memory of the correct information.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean that to me is fascinating when you think about it, because again, it's not intuitive, right? And I
Yep.
mean, if you think about so frequently in the way we design learning that, okay, even a basic quiz, right? You break down a basic quiz, normally you pick the wrong answer, you immediately are given what the right answer is.
Yeah. And we give, of course, much more than just the right
Right.
answer. There's
Right, yeah.
robust explanations,
But even at the
interactives.
fundamental level,
Yeah.
even at the fundamental level, that's historically how you approach it.
The data is astonishing on feedback. If you, as I recall from those experiments, if you show someone that they're just right or wrong, that's a certain kind of feedback, but surely not very robust. If you wait a little bit, show them whether they're right or wrong, and give them a full explanation, the difference in memory a couple of weeks out is around 500%. It's like
It's not like just
mind-bogglingly
a smidge of a
huge.
bit better.
No. Some of these effects are profoundly huge effects. You read the paper and go, okay, I got to read that again, because I think he's saying 500% differential here, and some of those papers are a little dense, but that is the case. I mean, if you do this right, you can see those kinds of huge effects. You just do not want to miss the science and miss out on something as powerful as that. So, we were very lucky. We've got just an incredible science advisory board. I'd say the chairman of our science advisory board is a guy named Robert Bjork. He's really in a sense the godfather of kind of modern learning cognitive psychology. They're all cognitive psychologists, but there's a very strong branch of cognitive psychology that just has to do with learning, and that's it. That's their area of expertise, and these guys do well. One of our guys was the chair of psychology at Harvard, but learning is his domain. Bob Bjork was the chair of psychology at UCLA. So it's a very well respected branch of cognitive psychology. In that these guys are making a huge difference in the world with their discoveries. And what they like about us is that we're taking their research and applying it at very large scale.
Bringing it to life.
Yeah, they love that.
So from what you've talked about so far, it really sounds like a lot of what the platform's doing, right? It's adaptive, which we've talked about. So it's changing the experience of what someone's going through. But ultimately, everything is trying to push people to this ideal state of where learning happens best, right? Where you said, if you're not, you need to be alert, but you don't want to be too far gone that you
Yep.
actually have the risk of either just not remembering anything or having a a PTSD type memory where it's like you can't get it out.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that is exactly right.
So how does
So
it, how have you been able to assess like where this range is, and how do you keep a learner? Are there other things that happen to help keep the learner in that state?
we do our very best. I mean, the platform is designed to take every trick we've ever discovered in cognitive psychology that helps people learn and especially create durable memories. I mean, learning and memory, they're very kindred notions, right? If you learn something one day, you'd really like to be able to remember it weeks or months or ideally years later. That's a durable memory. And we do our very best to, in the platform, to cause that to happen. We've read widely and deeply in this area, but people still are, they're variable. And another thing we measure in the platform is we measure how folks are struggling to learn. Are they in the game and learning well and paying attention and alert, or are they elsewhere? And you we're working on some ways to be able to tell whether or not that's what we would call a state, a temporary state. Someone's just having a rotten day. My girlfriend just left me. Mom, passed away last week. People get in states and emotional places that they've got other issues besides learning temporarily, hopefully. And then there's the notion of a trait. Is this someone who just doesn't give a damn about this place that they work or they're learning? They just are in this kind of permanently bad space. An organization kind of wants to know who that is. So when someone struggles, and they struggle mightily, usually in our reporting dashboard, a manager, a chief nursing officer in a hospital, the head hospitalist who watches all the docs that are in a hospital, the head of the pilots association, they'll look at who's struggling and often go have a chat with that person
Okay.
and find out what is going on. And these can be, kind of what's going on in your life conversations. And that's a great thing to be able to point out to someone. You do not want pilots or doctors or nurses in
In a
hopefully it's
state
just
of
a temporary
crisis,
state.
doing
Yeah,
things where they could cost lives.
yeah. So it's cool to be able to kind of give that kind of guidance. Some of our managers and executives who see how their workforce is, kind of the knowledge at scale in their workforce. They'll see that for the first time, and they'll say it's kind of like looking into the neurons of my workforce.
Yeah,
And to some
in many
extent,
ways.
that's kind of right.
In many ways it is. So I'm curious with this one, because this is right. This is one of the topics that I a lot of times talk about, is the fact that when we look at learning, in many cases we've historically looked at it in the silo, right? We're very focused on the learning component without thinking about how does that tie into the broader, you know, talent capability, talent, things like that. And what you just talked about is one of those things, right? Where we can start to look into the neurons of the organization and say, hey, where are people, right now, or what are some of these things? I'm curious with what's going on right now, right? It's a perfectly relevant thing. And I know this has been a conversation I've had multiple times, where you look at the fact that in many cases, the entire world is in a state of crisis right now,
Yeah.
right? And the impact that that's likely having on their ability to learn, to even be able to learn. And I'm just curious, have you, in these discussions you see, have you been able to see, because now you have some of these looks into some of that stuff, have you been able to see how that's playing?
Oh, it's a super interesting question. The time we're in, and if you're if you're watching this a year from now, hopefully we're not in this time
Yeah,
anymore.
hopefully a year from now.
But we're all sequestered. I'm in my bedroom and not at the office. And
Yeah, we'll do a 1 year anniversary. We'll both still be sitting right here.
yeah, the I hope that's not the case. In the developing world, of course, this problem is going to be even worse. But I would say that the distance learning, we think it's for us. I mean, we're committed to the notion that doing learning on a computer is profoundly wonderful in the sense that the algorithms can discover really interesting things about each individual learner. The states, the traits, the misinformation, the uncertainty, it's different for everybody. And so no teacher, it's just impossible for a human being, a teacher in a classroom, say, to kind of understand their students at that level. So even though we're in this time when, everybody's doing distance everything, it's social distancing, it's distance learning, it's distance Zoom meetings and all of that. The learning component is going to come out of this, I think, really strong. A few industries are going to do, kind of well from this kind of weird moment that we're having, only because people are going to discover even more how great that was. Maybe I won't get on a jet and fly to that meeting in Boston next week because it's so easy. I could just hang out here and
Have the same
say
experience.
have pretty much the same experience. I think the country's going to shift a little bit in that regard. And with distance learning and a platform like Amplifire and others, we're surely not the only platform out there, but they can do things that no teacher can ever do. The human component's great. I mean, I hope we get back to classes some at some point, because the human touch is a lovely thing, and the classroom is a great thing. Our platform gets used all the time. We have, like, I don't know, probably a million college kids every year go through the Amplifier platform. It's
Okay.
used widely in higher ed, and professors use it to, they've just done a lecture, and now they can go see their kids in Amplifier that night, answer questions in the exact topic that he was lecturing around, and he or she can see very clearly what parts of the lecture did not land.
Okay.
How could kids still be misinformed? I said that exact thing. Well, you probably didn't say it very clearly,
Right.
or they came in with some misconceptions that are very strong, and you're going to have to work harder to get rid of those misconceptions.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful tool in concert with the classroom, and it turns professors, and like I say, we're in higher ed, but would turn any teacher that uses it into a better teacher if they use it in concert with their classes.
Well, and that brings up two things that I think is a relevant topic to talk about, which actually we probably, had we started there, who knows, we might have ended the show and never even talked about the other thing. So maybe it's good it's coming up at the end. But, I think there is this, so there's two things. First, the exciting part to me about the data behind these things, and this is very exciting for a lot of the learning technology, is you look at the traditional classroom, and one of the things that a lot of times you hear is, well, but as a facilitator, I can read the room. I can read where people are at, which to a degree is true, but this is that times 1,000.
Yep.
And you have the human component where you may be, as a facilitator, operating off misinformation. So you might be saying, well, this is how I read somebody who's struggling. It's like,
Right.
no, they're just bored because they already know, and you're still droning on about the same thing that you've lost that state. And so I think that's where, when you look at this, it's like, no, this is an opportunity to assess where people are at factually and based on data,
Yeah.
not gut feel or
Yeah.
intuition or personal experience, which all carry tremendous bias. I think the other thing that's really interesting about this is, as this digital movement hits in learning and development, I frequently am in conversations where people are almost at odds, right? There's this battle of, well, it's digital, well, it's the human component is critical, and I would say it's both. Like you just described in that use case, it's not, oh, well, the role of the facilitator is gone. Well, no, it's absolutely not. The role is absolutely changing. And if anything, you're augmenting what you're doing with technology to create a superior experience
Yep.
around that. And use case you use there in higher ed, where you can say, hey, now you can know what actually resonated with your students. You can learn what didn't, and you can make data-driven decisions on where you need to do better or go deeper with people to actually
Yep.
ultimately, I like the analogy of your data, right? Bring everybody to the green, so there isn't that variance.
Yeah. Your first point, you've made a couple great points in there. The first one, which in which you said that some of us think we can read the room and kind of understand people. People are very, very hard to understand. There's a recent book by Malcolm Gladwell called Talking to Strangers, and it is very hard to know where people are at. Honestly, we have, we're human beings. We have all kinds of ways of camouflaging the truth about us. We
Exactly.
don't want people to know that we're misinformed. I mean, at all costs.
Right. I mean, if
Don't,
anything, we try and
right?
protect that.
Yeah, try and protect that. We all have, everybody has an ego of some sort. It's why people don't like to raise their hands in class, because asking the question kind of makes you look like, the perception is you might look less than not that smart
Yep.
or misinformed or uninformed. But of course, you should ask. Everybody in class has got the same question burning in their head. The thing about Amplifire is it can discover a lot of that stuff without that kind of human interaction problem, where you think you can read strangers, read people in the class. Very hard to do. But the computer can actually, weirdly, does a better job of that in some respects.
Well, it can do it at a speed and scale too. I mean, even if you were the best
Yep.
people
Yep.
reader, you
Yep.
can only do it at a speed and scale of a human limitation, which put the computer on it, you can do it now faster and more efficiently than anything else.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of Bloom's taxonomy and Benjamin Bloom and all his goals for learning. And he discovered that personal tutors, if you have your very own personal tutor, you can do a couple sigma kind of change in kind of what you know and the effectiveness of your learning. Well, these computers now, these adaptive systems, are those tutors. It's kind of Benjamin Bloom's dream coming true
Yeah.
right now in real time to the world, where everybody can have their own personal tutor who understands them to some extent and understands the issues they need the most help with. That's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, and that gets to, one of the concepts that pops up. I mean, the buzzword around is personalization. And I think one of the things that often we've struggled with in L&D is it's not that we didn't want to personalize, right? You talk about the fact Bloom would be, ecstatic looking at what we can do now with technology. And it's not that, before we intentionally were like, well, we don't want to personalize this for people, or we want people to suffer through things that we want them to suffer through stuff they already know. That was never the mentality. It was a limitation of what we could do, right? Because to your point about having an individual tutor, I think anybody in our industry would say that'd be ideal. Like if we had enough trainers in the world to work one-on-one with every one of our employees and truly get to know their needs and do that, we would absolutely do that. Unfortunately, that would require so many resources. It's just not feasible. But with technology, you're able to do that at the speed and scale that's required, which to me is, if really learners are at the center of everything, this whole concept of where technology is taking us to a truly personal level is fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's well said. The Even though it's technology, you can infuse technology with all of these human highest potential characteristics. I mean, we've looked to cognitive psychology for our guidance. That's a human-centered science, right? Psychology is all about human beings, and and we learned enough from psychology, this very human-centered science, to put it into our learning platform. That means it's kind of a humanistic platform to a great extent. It really is, as you just said, centered around human beings. Doesn't have to be a human being doing the work, with massive data available to us and this massive personalization and adaptability. The machine can do a lot of that work. Even better if you can then have a human being who can, at the elbow, as we say, kind of guide people in this very personal way to get them out of, say, struggle, to help them with some personal things things in their lives. The human touch has got to do that. I don't think any computer is going to be, a full AI pilot kind of guiding me in a therapeutic kind of sense anytime soon. That's going to be mano a mano, person to person, for quite some time.
Yeah.
But boy, you can discover and help in so many ways just in staying in the digital domain. Maybe not all, but an incredible amount.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's just, going back to that whole piece around the human-centered design is that, it is, and the current situation you look at, right, is another example of how critical the human component is in this. You look at how technology right now with what's going on, in many regards, we're being shown how important human connection is by
Yeah.
being disconnected, and technology is allowing us to bring us together. So it's actually been a little bit of a petri dish, I think, as you look at what's happening right now and the way technology can actually be human centered if used properly. And I think that's the big thing is how it's being used. So it's been really interesting to hear how you're taking some of that and building it into Amplifier.
Given the circumstance we're in, we very rapidly, with our healthcare practice, we're able to build a course for the frontline caregivers who are at tremendous risk to themselves right now. We built that course, and it's got deployed really fast to our healthcare alliance, and it's imagine being on the front line with folks with this virus right now, how risky that is. You cannot make a mistake, a confidently held mistake. No Dunning-Kruger effects are allowed on those front lines, right? You have to really know how to protect yourself and your patients and your family when you get home from this virus. So it's been gratifying for us to build that course in this time. Again, very human centered. It's all about saving lives through knowledge, having the correct knowledge of how to act in this extraordinarily dangerous situation for frontline caregivers.
Yeah. Well, and I think that right there kind of highlights the importance of this type of technology, and really, because if you look at it, like I said, it's a bit of a petri dish and an experiment, because look how quickly the knowledge we've had about COVID-19 has changed in weeks,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's changed in weeks. What went from, well, this is how to handle it, or this is the way to do it, that has changed almost overnight. And so
Yeah.
that confidently misheld information is there. I mean, you see it, I literally see it in the news day after day, where you go, people are
Yeah.
making decisions on yesterday's news, and that yesterday's news is going to cost lives if we don't root it out
Yeah.
and turn it to green.
Yeah, it's again a great point. We started off. I started off talking about knowledge as being at the center of everything we hold near and dear. The incredible amounts of wealth that we take for granted that are around us. But it's knowledge of this virus, for example, that we are gonna master it, and the knowledge will get spread around in this super effective way, and we'll build a vaccine and all that. It's all based on learning and knowledge. I mean, all of that is being driven. As I said earlier, it's always at the core of all the good things that happen. And getting a handle on this thing will be a good thing, and we will do it.
Yeah. Well, going back to your visual, I've been saying, from the beginning of this, what is most dangerous about this thing is we didn't have that know-how at the center of it,
Yeah,
right? So we were operating in this world where we were making our best guesses at what to do without know-how
yeah.
around it. And so as we build that know-how at the core of that model, suddenly it will not be as big of a threat. So
Yeah, we're sadly a little late to it. There was, I think I told you earlier, I'd sold a company to Bill Gates a few years ago, and Bill has been at the center of trying to educate us about pandemics for years now. He gave a famous TED Talk in 2015.
yeah,
Everybody should go see Gates' TED Talk. He predicted, 5 years ago, exactly what we're in the middle of now. So knowledge was there. I think just there's been a failure to kind of really recognize that we should have been acting on that knowledge for quite some time now.
yeah, yeah.
We're a little late to the party,
Little
but
late to the party.
we're definitely at the party.
We're yeah, and like we said, hopefully a year from now, when we do this again, we've moved from our chairs and been able to go do something else.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
well, Charles, this has been honestly a fascinating discussion. I've really appreciated your time. I know you're 2 hours behind me, so it was an early morning to come live, and I know this is the first time that you've done this type of setup. So
That's fun.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you being here. Hopefully, everybody watching. I know there were a lot of comments coming in. This was helpful for you, one, to learn about Amplifier and how their technology works, but also just to think differently about the way people learn and the way our brains work and all the different connections in there to be more effective in what we do, and the way technology can actually make us more human centric. So thank you very much for being here, Charles. I appreciate it, and hopefully this won't be the last time we talk.
It's been a pleasure, Christopher. I'd love to do it again with you sometime. All the
right.
best out there.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend.